Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazo.
Hello, brothers and sisters in Christ. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're getting closer and closer to May 1st and 2nd and the Worldview Matters Conference. That's in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Delta Hotel. There's the website, WorldviewMattersConference.com. We are down to, we're under 70 tickets remaining. So if you're interested, hey, we're going to be plugging this thing and promoting it. We've got it on the radio. We've got social media. We've got what we're doing here. So if you're seriously considering it, you can always get a refund on the tickets, by the way. If you buy them and then you go, oh, I can't go after all, they'll refund you. So WorldviewMattersConference.com, 12 speakers, 15 sessions, 2 days, and great fellowship. And we were talking about redeeming the time and understanding what's going on from a biblical perspective. Great speakers. I want to bring in my guest today. We're going to talk about another great topic. Pete Garcia, his website is on Substack. It's rev310.substack.com. rev310.substack.com. Brother, good to see you again. Thank you for your time.
Hey, it's good to be back with you, David.
So, Pete, I saw you live for a brief moment last night anyway. How do people connect with you? I know it's on your Substack, but they just subscribe and they'll get reminders of whenever you go do a live video?
Yeah, so if they're already subscribed to it, there's a paid option. There's obviously a free option as well. But when I do a Substack live, usually once a week, that's really just for my subscribers. We talk about whatever they want to talk about. They can drive the conversation. They can jump on the camera with me. It's kind of, we've had a mix of everything. So we're still playing around with options, but people generally like it. So it's a lot more laid back conversation and stuff. So
very cool. Thank you. So we'll mention that again later, because Substack is a relatively new thing. How long has Substack been around? Or maybe at least some of the Christian people that I've been, pastors and others that are on there that I've had on the podcast, maybe I only know of Substack through them. Has it been around for a long time?
You know what? I don't know. It's been at least 4 or 5 years. So okay. I think probably around the 2020 timeframe.
Okay. What's funny is the first person I started following was Christopher Rufo. Chris Rufo, I follow him, and he's been on it maybe when it was early on. So, Pete, there's so much going on in the world, and there's so much from a biblical perspective to watch for. I was asking you, what should we talk about? Because you talk about all kinds of things. You speak at conferences, you do your videos, and one of the topics was it's all going according to plan, and then we'll get to the how this falls into setting the stage for prophetic things, Bible prophecy. But Iran is the big topic right now, but we don't have to stick with this the whole conversation today, because as I saw your notes that you sent me, we can talk about Mexico, Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal, and then NATO, United Nations. So Western dominance. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, we have to, when we're talking about Trump and why he's doing the things he's doing and the moves that he's making, I think we need to start looking at Trump as a wartime president, but not a wartime president, not one level of war. Like, it's not like World War II where we had the Nazis and the Japanese and the Italians under their respective regimes, and that was just kind of the one level of warfare, and that's easy to get behind. It's easy to call us the good guys, call them the bad guys, and then plan accordingly. And at the time, we had the entire economy behind the war effort, et cetera. And FDR did a lot of draconian things back then that I think most Americans today would shudder at, confiscating gold, converting civilian industries into wartime facilities, and turning the Japanese. There's a lot of different things that were going on But truly, it was a military conflict at heart.
Hmm.
Now Trump is waging war on multiple levels. He's got an economic warfare with the tariffs. He's got the political warfare, both internal to the United States against the Democrats and rhinos, and then he's got the deep state. You've got the media. You've got
Gosh.
far left progressive non-governmental organizations or NGOs, things like Soros Open Society Foundation. So he's got a lot of different things, and it seems like he's waging war on every single level. And this Iran conflict is one that really deals with his Eastern dominance, and that ties in with his larger goal of the strengthening the Abraham Accords and then growing it to include Saudi Arabia and Iran. If Saudi comes in, obviously the other Gulf nations would come in as well. UAE is in it now, but this would bring in Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, etc. So that is the Eastern dominance. But in Western dominance, it started with the Panama Canal, kicking the Chinese out and preventing them from controlling both ends of the Panama Canal. It followed with taking out a Maduro. And notice that we took Maduro out in the way that we did after months of sitting off the coast there, blowing up drug boats, right?
That's right.
Trump operates in this plan of organized confusion. Like he knows what he wants to do, and only a close inner circle are going to know exactly what he wants to do. But he keeps everybody else guessing, and that's part of his ability to use leverage in his negotiating skills. Obviously he is a master negotiator when it comes to making people do,
Yeah.
getting the best deal for his whatever he's pushing, right?
Well,
So
when you
then
mentioned, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, by taking out Maduro, though, it sets into motion this domino effect of weakening and dismantling Cuba's government under, I think his name is Nidal, taking out or removing the cartels out of Mexico, or weakening the cartels, taking the cartels out of Ecuador, taking the cartels out of Colombia. And, that it's all part of this larger plan to bring back the Monroe Doctrine, which kicks Europe, kicks Asia, kicks everybody else out of the Western hemisphere from, we are going to be the dominant force in this hemisphere. And I think Stephen Miller once said, we're a superpower and it's about time we started to act like one. And so people have been trying this liberal world, rules-based world order since World War II has been these big chains basically shackling the United States and preventing the United States from becoming this the true superpower that it can be. But that's a good thing and a bad thing. But all of this has got to get weighed against Bible prophecy.
Yep. I want to ask you about NATO and the United Nations in a minute, but let's stick in the West before we move on. Aren't you kind of surprised with, you mentioned all the warfare, not spiritual warfare, but just literally the deep state and all those who are against Trump, everyone that's coming against him. Are you surprised with he's kind of very methodical. Is that the word? Methodical. Yeah. Methodical. And there's got to be a plan, but sometimes it does appear to be planned chaos to throw the enemy or the target off. Doesn't it surprise you that with all of his enemies, even within government, that there haven't been leaks on the plan and what he was intending to do, or even through Pete Hegseth in the military? Are you kind of surprised by that? Because I am.
Yeah, I am too. I think a lot of lessons have been learned over the years with regard to him. When he first won in 2016, I think he was probably just as surprised as everyone else that he won. And he basically didn't really understand how Washington worked. And he was pretty naive, coming in. And he leaned on a lot of the established Republicans and the folks that were recognizable names inside of the Beltway. Obviously, that turned out to be pretty disastrous when it came time for any of these kind of crisis points, like COVID, the George Floyd, the Summer of Peace, Summer of Love, whatever it was called back then. The markets, the basically all of the fraud that happened, he basically stood alone. Everybody that could have helped him said, we tried, but then, they really didn't. And so I think that Trump took stock of those that were loyal to him. I think he values loyalty above anything else. So
Hmm.
this time around, I think he's surrounded himself with the most trusted people that he can. And, he's really focused on keeping the unit tight and keeping information from leaking out. So, and I think a lot of this has to do with that he's just not telling people until it's go time.
Yeah, the top. It seems like people at the top know, but it's amazing, actually, really surprising. Do want to mention or talk about Canada and Greenland briefly. Before we do that, you mentioned economic warfare, and I don't think tariffs have not been in the headlines because of Iran and other stories, right? Other political stuff, but I didn't think about that as warfare, but I guess it really is. We've kind of been punished by other nations. We've not been treated fairly. And now Trump comes in and he's reversing all that. Do you think we'll see more of the maybe good fruit from that by the time we get to the midterms?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's really just wanting he's not so much that he loves tariffs. He finds it an effective tool to use to bring people back to the bargaining table. A
Hmm.
lot of the tariff or a lot of the trade imbalances that we have today are decades old. They're things that came out of the World War II, out of the liberal rules-based order, as they call it, Bretton Woods, the Marshall Plan, et cetera. And we basically did this to ourselves to give these struggling nations that were trying to rebuild after that calamitous event, an economic leg up. And, it's long. We this thing is long since needed to be overhauled, and re-looked at, and no president has really done that
Hmm.
until Trump because tariffs had become so unpopular. But I think it brings people back to the bargaining table, and they can renegotiate their trade differences, and we're not, they want it so that it's fair. If both sides pay 10% tariff, then both sides do it, but it's not going to be the U.S. pays 10% tariffs and the other side pays zero, or something to that effect. So
Hmm.
I think the tariffs have been used effectively. I know the Supreme Court came out against it, uh, but he's still able to leverage tariffs to certain degrees. I don't know all the specifics off the top of my head, but I know that he's still able to use them because I think it was Supreme Court Justice Alito wrote into the his piece about how to do it. So Trump's like, oh, thank you. So yeah.
It seems like looking back, hindsight's 2020, right? Those 4 years in between his two terms, 45 and 47, as bad as those 4 years were when it comes to the left and socialism and the chaos, the Biden administration and attacking citizens, censoring people and all that, it just seems like Trump was so much better prepared and had a plan for this term. It's just really is amazing all the areas that he's attacking, all the things that he's doing, and I would say accomplishing in a short amount of time. I think the media was probably like they didn't know what to criticize because he was doing so much. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think those 4 years were critical for him to really, um, well, one, surround himself with the right people. So he found those people that were
Hmm.
still loyal to him after 2020 and that had been with him in his first administration and had suffered through the agonizing reality of having the election stolen from you and done, this was basically a coup by the FBI, the Democrat Party, the CIA, various groups within the deep state all kind of facilitated this to happen. And then the media then equally were compliant in enforcing this narrative that if you question the election, then you are that you are crazy, that you're a conspiracy theorist, or that you're, whatever. And battling that, I think, was probably the hardest thing to get over. But I think this time around, he took those 4 years and really began to hone in on how to attack the issues and in what order. and what priority, and what does he want the end of his 4 years to look like if he does win? And then how do you keep those things as permanently in place as possible? And so you saw him go after the deep state corruption within the first hours of his being sworn in,
Hmm.
going after USAID, all the corruption and fraud and all the various government agencies in which he oversees. So he has the legal ability and authority to do those things and to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. And all of those things have been institutionalized for decades, and they were all benefiting primarily the Democrats
Yep.
and to some extent, establishment Republicans that had been in office for decades. So I think that was a smart move, and I think that this Iran issue is simply it's the master stroke. If he can pull this off, it will open up the Abraham Accords to become the most dominant Middle East consortium in the world that could possibly, if we were going to be here that long, it would possibly be in effect for decades. So I think he sees the gamble as being worth the risk.
Yeah, he must, and those around him, the advisors. Before we go back to the east, let's talk about Canada and Greenland. Just some of the things he put out there. Canada being the 51st state. Just some of the things about Greenland being valuable, and it is from a national security standpoint. But what are your thoughts on that? Because we haven't heard these things mentioned by any other president, right? Now we're actually looking at Canada and Greenland, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you go back to the old map of the world with the Club of Rome, it had the world broken up into like 10 regions. If you go to the Technate map, which was, I think, from the 1930s or 40s, and the Technate map basically has all of North America to include Greenland and Canada, the United States, Mexico, and then all through Central America down to Venezuela, interestingly, to include Cuba. They would become part of this northern regional power structure. I guess they would be kind of like one government. And the world is broken up into those sections, very similar to the Club of Rome map, with that exception that it does extend the North American region down to Venezuela. So it's not surprising. I mean, if where we are in time with regard to the Lord's return, we should see the 193 different nations that make up our present international body begin to start consolidating in ways that align with Bible prophecy. We know in the last days that there's going to be a beast that comes out of the sea. It's a hybrid beast. It's got a head of a lion, the fur body of like a leopard. It's got feet like a bear. It's got 10 heads, 7 horns, or 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. All of that symbolism ties back to Daniel, and they all spoke of nations. And you can go back to Daniel and get the exact depictions and descriptions of who those symbols represent. So they're not arbitrary, but it's interesting that all of those, that whole beast that comes out, it's all one entity. So it's just one conglomerate of all these prior nations that are now being absorbed into one. And that kind of aligns with the Technate map, which, I mean, obviously Daniel's letter came out in Revelation, came out thousands of years before the Technate map, but it's interesting to see how those people see the world versus what the Bible's been saying for the last 2,000 years.
Yes, absolutely. It's fascinating. Speaking of nations, how does America divorce the United Nations or NATO? People talk about that all the time, particularly Republicans or conservatives or Christians. It just seems like the United Nations is anti-Christian, anti-Israel, anti-America, and we just have put up with it for all these years. How does this happen?
Well, I think Trump's already been doing this to a large degree with the United Nations. I think we pulled out of like 31 different UN organizations that were very much anti-American, or anti-Western values, the Judeo-Christian values. So we pulled out of those. It can come down to defunding. But I think as far as officially divorcing the United Nations, it's a treaty, so it would have to be that Senate, the 2/3 of the Senate would have to approve of that. Same with NATO. But again, as the commander in chief, Trump's going to have an incredible amount of leverage as to how much we participate with NATO, given the turn of events here in the last month. So We know in the first term he wanted to divorce NATO because the other nations weren't paying anything into it, so they were 100% reliant on the U.S. to
Jeez.
provide everything. And to a large degree, the United Nations would collapse too if they did not have funding from the United States. So I honestly think that his move with the Board of Peace was set up to create an alternative to the United Nations, and it
Interesting.
limits the nations that can come into it. So if you're a third world country, you're not going to just be able to come in because you have to put up $1 billion. He wants the movers and the shakers in an actionable body that will basically go to, and I think it's part of, it's going to be merged into or married into the Abraham Accords. And so if you can get the Abraham Accords going, successful, running, then he can incorporate the Board of Peace into that. And he's basically established a very powerful alternative to the United Nations, just like BRICS tried to do. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they set that up as an alternative to the US dollar. Obviously, a lot of those countries and are having a lot of major problems, and that whole move to devalue the dollar kind of fell apart. Now the dollar is going to collapse at some point because it's 39 trillion. We're 39 trillion in debt. So the nations are racing right now to get their central bank digital currencies online, about 130 nations. So I think they see it coming. I think they're kind of trying to forestall it as long as possible. But
So what about, I think we're getting close. Before we get to the end of this, I don't want to run out of time with you before we talk about what victory in Iran looks like. And it just seems like there's a lot of possible scenarios or outcomes. What does victory look like for the people? Is there going to be a new government there? What kind of government? Will the U.S. still need to be there and have a presence? Talk to us a little bit about that from what you experience.
well, if Trump can he's got his 15 points proposals. That the core of that is keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. It is Iran permanently abandoning any attempts to try and pursue nuclear weapons or enriched uranium to create nuclear weapons. It's the dismantlement of the Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo facilities. And IAEA, organization would have to have full access to those at any time, all the time. They have to hand over all of the enriched uranium they already have, which is about 450 kilograms. They would have to cut all funding to their proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and in militias in Iraq and other places. If they did that, if they agreed to that, I think that the U.S. would then turn around and give them or pull all the crippling sanctions that they've had on them for decades now. They could stand up some type of civilian nuclear energy program at Bushehr. Obviously, any of the material that comes out of that would have to be created outside of Iran, brought in, and if there's anything created in Iran, it would have to go back out. They would remove the snapback options, which is it's like letting Iran have all their benefits back, and then the minute they do something, the snapback allows them to immediately reinstitute all of those sanctions, all of those restrictions,
Wow.
etc. So if they can remove the snapback option, I think that would be a very appealing to the Iranian government, whatever government comes out of this. The
Yeah.
problem is that he's negotiating with these guys, and you've got these other guys in the IRGC that are completely decentralized, saying, no, we're not giving up. We're going to fight to the end. So
Yeah.
how does that shake out? I don't know. This may be a case where, if they refuse to give up, then, we end up dropping some type of nuke or maybe a thermobaric type of bombs to completely obliterate those facilities. So if they're not going to hand over their enriched uranium, we're going to make it so they can never get to it again. It's going to be so far buried underground. And they'd have to take out the Zagros Mountains there along the coast of the Hormuz. I mean, they would have to completely dismantle all of the hidden military bunkers and things in there to get rid of the threat there to the Strait of Hormuz. So if he can get any of those things, I think that he would call that a success.
Okay.
Primarily the abandonment of enriched uranium, or that has to end. The keeping open of the Strait of Hormuz, and then the dismantlement of their proxy units. I think if he can get those three things, that they could make a deal.
Okay, we're really running out of time now, and I know we could spend so much more time on Israel's role in light of Bible prophecy, Ezekiel 38, 39, Gaza, Hezbollah, Hamas. We talked about America and the U.S. and our role. What about Israel's role? What role do they play in these end-time scenarios?
Okay. Well, Ezekiel 38 starts out with them living in peace and unwalled villages, living securely in their land. So that's why I'm so hawkish, I guess, on this aspect of that peace is going to be the end state for all the stuff that we're seeing, because I believe it's going to set the stage for Israel to finally feel like they've arrived, that they've achieved peace in their time. And it all stems back to Iran. Iran has been the biggest roadblock for the Abraham Accords since Trump's first term. So if they can bring Iran to the negotiating table and weaken them to a point that none of their neighbors are afraid of them anymore, they've changed government, they've abandoned these pursuits for nuclear weapons or this proxy war, I think that Israel can relax, and then that sets them up really. I don't want to say nicely, but it sets them up almost exactly as where we see the beginning of Ezekiel 38, 39. And so for the Jews, this is kind of a double-edged sword, because they think that's the last war that they'll ever fight as a nation, because after 38, 39 of Ezekiel, you go into chapter 40. From 40 on, it's about having the new temple, their third temple. It seems like it's their messianic age. And we know, because we have the New Testament, that's only the beginning. That's really going to start the beginning of what we know as the 70th week of Daniel, which is a 7-year period in which Israel will be almost completely destroyed. There was a third of them were killed in the Holocaust. This time it's going to be 2/3 of them will almost be wiped out.
That's right.
The time of Jacob's trouble, which is found in Jeremiah 37 through 11, and then Daniel 9, 24 through 27. 2 Old Testament passages talking about the last days for Israel. So this isn't anything that Christians are creating. We're not happy that this is about to happen.
Yeah.
I think that we need to talk about it and not allow this to be this blind spot that kind of clouds our judgment. And I love how WvMd&x once said, I think he got this from his wife actually, where he talks in Zechariah about that 2/3 will be destroyed and that 1/3 will be brought through that refiner's fire. But we're not told. We're told that percentage. So our goal is to make that 1/3 smaller and smaller, or the 2/3 smaller and smaller, so that there's more and more Jews that go up in the rapture. And fewer that have to go through and endure the 7-year tribulation.
Yeah. Wow, Pete. I wish we had an hour with you, but we got to get you on again soon. But when's your next live?
I will be live on Monday, I believe.
Okay.
So every Monday night, yeah, for sure.
Okay. So I want to mention rev310.substack.com, rev310.substack.com. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you, brother.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
God bless you, friends. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. See you next time.